Hello and a very warm welcome to today's demo where we are looking at the automatic processing of good and bad invoices. So my name is Susie West and I am the founder and CEO at sharedserviceslink.com, and the sponsor for today is ESCA, and I'm very pleased that we have Stephen Wynne-Jones, Technical Director at ESCA, who's going to be facilitating the demo. So let's have a brief look before I hand over to Wynne at what we're going to be looking at in this 30-minute demo. You're going to be given insight into how to automatically process good and bad invoices, in particular looking at how to intelligently recognize, read and capture the data, convert the captured data into your preferred format, validate the invoices with minimal manual intervention, improve your payment approval process with workflow functionality and multi-level workflow functionality. We're looking at vendor portal functionality as well, and also the electronic archiving functionality that is available. So you have a role to play as well, ladies and gentlemen. We've got a 20-minute demo once I hand over to Wynne, and then we've got questions from you, please. So make sure you post your questions through nice and early, and then we've got the last 10 minutes of this half an hour to answer your questions. So do take me up on that offer. With that in mind, I'd now like to hand over to Wynne. Over to you, please, Wynne-Jones.
Thank you, Susie. So what I'd like to show to you today is, when I get control here, is some demonstrations of basically two aspects of processing invoices within the system. The first will be of the two really main sorts of invoices that we have within the system. First of those would be FI invoices, the second of which would be MM type invoices. And within the screen now, what I'm going to show is a demonstration of the software of ESCA, how we can process this. And ESCA can provide a solution for processing invoices both on demand and on premise. So the software we run can be either in your own location, or we can actually have this hosted by ESCA itself. Typically, as I indicated earlier, when we have an invoice, the main sorts of invoices you have are two sorts. There's the first sort, which is typically pure financial invoice, and those are really invoices that come in through to your enterprise from which you have not actually raised any purchase order for. And within ESCA, we have the ability to scan these documents, read key information like invoice numbers, account numbers, using a generic template. We do not have to write templates for each individual vendor in this case. We're reading these templates, looking for keywords like order number, for example. So here we have an invoice where we have received this because we have originally raised a purchase order for goods or services with all the line items on there which we would expect to get invoiced for. And then when those documents come in, of which of course we have no control over the layout of, we have a generic engine within ESCA that is able to read these documents, extract the key information to present to a user to validate if necessary. If that information is extracted perfectly, then actually we can do what we call touchless processing, or automatically process that invoice through to your ERP application. The main interface, the user experience that we have, is web-based, so whether you have on-premise or on-demand as software as a service solution, when you log into an ESCA on-demand system or an ESCA system for AP, accounts payable processing, we have this generic web interface with a number of tabs within there. And we can hold data, which is obviously related to your AP side. So when we're validating that data, we can have lookups. Now this is typically what we would call an ERP agnostic type solution in this phase. So here, for example, we are holding against various company codes that you may have, for example, tax codes, all the VAT codes that you may hold within your organization. We do, for particular ERP applications, actually have a connected system, so that information is looked up live. But when we come to process the invoices on the invoice tab here are shown to the users, where they can select, if necessary, which invoices to choose and open and to process. And when they do this, then what we present to the user is basically a two-part form. On the right-hand side, we show the image. On the left-hand side is the data we have extracted with any data checking behind it. So, for example, here we've got our controls for showing the manipulation of the image. We can have data within here, so we can check whether we're invoices or credit notes. And the information itself, things like vendor information, we intelligently search the database that we had earlier. So here we found that it is vendor 186 by matching the fax and number on the system. The invoice date we've read here is quite an old invoice, so I'm just making it a bit more up to date here. All my values have now been fixed, and we highlight data which we perceive to be incorrect by actually putting a red mark around that data, so we highlight to the user that data which needs correction on the system. Here, for example, the invoice number, we've actually detected a duplicate document within the system. So to save you the embarrassment perhaps of posting an invoice twice within the system, we can show that to you here. So I've just corrected that. Data, description, no order number on this particular document, but we're also reading things like the total amount, the net amount and taxes, and checking that this all balances within the the sanity check within the invoice itself with the data. So we've read the taxes level, we've read all the net amounts and the data. For more complete information within certain ERP applications where you may need to set payment terms, assignments, business areas, we can manipulate these web forms quite easily to present the information which you would need to capture to send through to ultimately your ERP application to create the document there. Typical business documents comprise two parts, a header, which we've seen, and then obviously the line information, where we're giving really the breakdown of the information within this non-purchase order invoice. And of course, within most financial systems, a non-purchase order system will rely upon you to specify the accounting details. So here, for example, my ledger accounts, my GL codes here, I'm entering, deciding from lookup, pop-up systems, which will either be interrogating the ERP application or the local tables to specify to which account book ledger this should go. Checking the amounts. Note when I click on a field, if that field is extracted from the document itself, we are taken to the document in question to see it. Here we've got the cost centers that I'm processing, so I'll put this, let's have a look here, let's go back against the training department. And so we are processing all these documents within the system and tax codes. Now the tax code I brought forward automatically from the system, but at any time I can change those and make sure that everything matches exactly. So that ultimately we are checking the balance on this invoice, doing the tax calculations to ensure we have a valid document. Because ultimately what we want them to do is to post this through to your system. Now the issue with pure financial invoicing is that this has arrived into the enterprise with no purchase order number required. So this could be, for example, an electricity bill, a rates demand bill. So there's a question of whether or not you should actually pay the invoice. So what we have within the system is we have some workflow approval, payment approval, which is based upon lookup tables that you can set on the vendor and the amount of the invoice from that vendor to specify which set of approvers this should go to. Now in this particular instance, for this MJ vendor, for a value of only £337, it should just go to one person in the chain, so which is Mr. Win Manager, so it must be my manager. And I can place a comment on the invoice message, which will now be sent across to the system. We can teach particular vendor invoices. If necessary, I can send an email to to the vendor if I have a query. If this turned out to be a PO invoice, I could actually switch it to be a PO invoice. I could set it aside so I could process later. This may not even be a scanned invoice, so I could reject it. I could forward it to more AP staff, just save the document or cancel any changes I've made. Now in this case, everything's fine. I've now got no errors with my system, so I'm now going to send this to the approver. That is effectively approve this invoice and send it into the workflow process. So a little confirmation message for me. I am currently the AP operator here, so I'll know now that this has gone over to the Win Manager user. So what would the experience of the Win Manager user be? Well, let's log in to Esker On Demand with the Win Manager user. Here he goes, he logs in, and immediately we see on our home screen here I am, Win Manager. I've got a highlight that says, I have invoices to validate. If I click on that link, then I'm taken to my list of invoices, and it says that I have some payment approval to perform. Let's open this document and see what we see against the invoice itself. You'll see fundamentally the same document, obviously the same invoice document, but the form is subtly different now, and a lot of area is just read-only, because we've specified that in this particular payment process system is that, fair enough, I can't change things like the invoice date or the amount of the currency of the document itself. But one thing we have specified is that actually, as first approver of here, I can actually change the cost centers and the GL codes, so the general ledger codes on here. So, as being a typical technical manager, I'll put all of this through back to marketing, and so I'll open this up and put a little message back so that when we do ultimately approve this, this will then be logged and audited into the system, because at every stage of the system of processing of this document, we audit the changes made to the document, who made those changes and when those changes were made. I'm going to approve this document, and that will then post it through and clear the payment with the changes made on the cost center itself. I could just save the document back to work at it later, cancel if I didn't want to make any changes whatsoever as before. So let's approve this, and now a note has come through that I now have chosen to approve the payment of that. And in a classic sort of linked system to an ERP application, that would actually send a message through to the ERP system to release the payment flag hold on that document itself. All the time we're doing this, of course, we're sending notification messages through, typically via email to people to specify that you need to be able to do something. Also available is the ability to send to the vendor a notification that we've received and are processing your invoice. So this is an experience that a vendor will be able to see when you're processing their invoices. So here is a list of the published invoices that somebody has sent to us here. So I've just seen my document here waiting for processing. And at any time, the vendor can come in, check the status of the values of all their invoices from Acme, which we obviously sort of brand the vendor invoice to be your company. And then the vendor themselves, if necessary, can change their own personal information, key amongst which is obviously the email address to which they're wanting to have the notification sent, but they could specify their address, the language in which the interface is shown onto the system, so that you could change it to be one of 5 national languages within Europe, so that you can get French notifications instead of English. And here's my document. If I actually click on one of these documents, then the system will open up the states of that and show me the current processing and the date and time and the list of the documents itself. And as a vendor, I can go in and actually see the image of the invoice that you as a customer are effectively processing for that vendor. So they themselves can check and hopefully reduce the number of calls through to your AP department. So that was effectively processing what I would call non-purchase order invoices, where typically workflow is required in order to be able to process documents into the system. What I'm now going to show you is a material-based purchase order-based invoice. So these are invoices where you have raised a purchase order. The purchase order in itself, I hope, would have gone through authorization levels. So by the time the invoice comes into the system, if the purchase order was approved, there should be no reason why you shouldn't approve the purchase order, the invoice itself that matches that purchase order. Now, evidently, we have to match the purchase order data. So held within the Esker system, or if you have a linked communicating system with the ERP, we obtain the information directly from the ERP. But in this case, I have a non-connected system, so we're synchronizing the data from the ERP application to Esker. We are holding details of all the outstanding open line items of your system. so that when the invoice comes in, we can use our generic map to map the purchase order, find the lines, and to see the lines of those invoices and match them in a three-way match to the information we have here. And of course we have also the purchase order header information, which gives us a nice quick summary of all those pieces of data out there for the purchase orders that we know that we are expecting values for. So for example, in this case I've got one invoice which I know I have some open amounts delivered, two orders of which I know there are no open amounts waiting. So I shouldn't expect to see any invoices come in for those. So what does an MM or a PO related invoice look like? Well, again, very similar form structure. We show the invoice on the right-hand side. We show the extracted data through the generic extraction rule on the left-hand side of the form. And again, we're locating and identifying people, in this case, again, by the fax and telephone number. They tend to be fairly unique to each vendor. And again, reading the information from the document itself by searching for keywords. This is technology that is actually patented by ESCA, and we call it DDC, which is dynamic document capture. Easy for me to say. So here we found the order number, and as a consequence of finding that order number on the header of the data, we can actually read the purchase order line details and do matching. We have the ability to do payment approval if necessary. Actually shouldn't normally be required for purchase order related invoices. We have a new tab for the purchase orders where we're showing this match take place. We have the header details here indicating all the balances that we found within the document to ensure that they are correct. We can again see the payment approval listings, but the key area is here. This is where ESCA has managed to achieve a three-way match between invoice lines and purchase order lines, and we pair these up. So here I have an invoice line matched exactly to a purchase order line in my system. I have both material codes matched, amounts matched, the quantity waiting for delivery matching, and the tax code has been read from the purchase order itself. So fundamentally, all the detail I need to create an invoice record is there and obtained from the already approved purchase order. And in this case, for all four lines, we have a perfect match of those data. So this would represent really quite a nice invoice in the system. If I'm unsure of some data, I can always zoom in, check the description to make sure everything is matching, and for all four lines I see that I have my data. And typically, if any lines were remaining or unmatched, I would see them underneath the PO reference area. So I could actually do a visual check between those lines which are on the invoice and those lines which are actually in the purchase order and yet unmatched. Perfect four-way match. I've actually had to change very little in the data form here, and I can just post this straight through to the system. Let's have a look now at a couple of invoices where we have some issues with the invoice, because classically there are two main issues one would have: pricing and delivery. So here's another invoice from my famous Acme company, and I'll go straight to the line and I see instantly I've got some balance issues here, and looking at my purchase order reference list, I see that I haven't actually read all the lines or matched all the lines. I have one line on the invoice for which I have not actually managed to match a purchase order line, and this is my purchase order line that should have matched that. Now, a lot of things do match. I get the right sort of description, but the key difference here is that the amount that is open and the amount that I'm being charged on the email are different. Therefore, we have stopped it on the system. We don't wish to obviously pay this automatically. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set this aside. I need to check the pricing of it. So I have the ability to mark this invoice as being set aside, put a reason code against that, and I can make that reason code as lengthy as short as possible to be found later. And I've now saved that away so I can resolve any issues with the vendor. The next sort of resolution, typical resolution we have, is with quantities. And again, I have read the invoice. We've read all of the lines of this particular purchase order, but here we've actually got delivery issues, because within the rules of the ESCA system, we've put in there the processing of the fact they are trying to invoice us for goods that we have not actually marked as being received. So in this case, what we have here is a goods receipt issue, typically called. So what I will do is just simply set this aside, mark it as waiting for goods to be received, and process it. And in the fullness of time, at the end of the day, I can come back and look and view now only those invoices that I've set aside for processing in order to resolve my conflicts, either with the vendor or with my purchasing department, should it be a pricing issue. And then I can work further with those documents into the system. And that is how ESCA, through the technology of using on-demand processing and submission and extraction of data within our system, can now help you get that invoice information, its data, and then pass that through to your system for processing. Thank you very much. Now over to Susie for questions.
That's great. Thank you so much, Wynne. So if we can move through to questions, please. Coming up on my so if you haven't already posted your question, please do so. The first question I've got for you, please, Wynne. So what percentage accuracy do you achieve for scanned invoices?
How long is a piece of string? It really does depend on the quality of the document and how clean a document looks. But typically, what we do, and what I've certainly done in the past, is when we set these systems up, I ask for a huge handful of invoices and just throw them at the system. And typically our sort of read rate is about 70%. Now OCR, the technology we're using, optical character recognition, is not a perfect science. So it's sometimes quite surprising, one, the information it can read of an invoice, but sometimes, obviously, as a human, you look at a document, you say, well, why couldn't it read that? There are subtle things within an invoice layout that can sometimes stop accurate reading. But any time where a data that is read has been incorrectly read or can't be read at all, obviously we are putting in place rules so that we can try and correct that information. Or help you assist to validate that information to help it move it through the system. But I would say somewhere between 70% to 80% read accuracy rate.
Okay, good. What about people are striving for touchless processing? So, how much does something that the technology that we've been looking at just now contribute towards 100% touchless processing?
Within the purchase order invoice arena, then for well laid out invoices, then you can achieve 100% rate for a particular vendor. It will depend on the vendor, your vendor relationship, and the quality of the invoices you're getting from your vendor. For the financial side, it is far more difficult to actually say that you would ever have 100% validation because of the payment process workflow. Now, if you're wishing to sort of basically abrogate the responsibility of payment approval from ESCA through to some other system, you may very well have an ERP application that has payment approval workflow built within it, then you can use ESCA purely as a front end, and we do have people doing that. Using ESCA as a front end to capture as much data as possible and then passing the information straight through to the ERP, in which case effectively we are 100% touchless.
Okay. So are GRNs recorded on ESCA as well?
They can be, yes. The demonstration I showed today wasn't GRN based, but certainly we have situations where we have people that can use GRNs as a means of invoice validation for purchase order based systems. We have also in the past used ESCA and its more general purpose, been able to write forms for general business documents, to actually use those documents as GRN postings themselves. So there's two parts to this question. One, yes, we can use GRNs as a means of validating the receipt of goods for invoicing purposes, and the other thing is we can actually use ESCA as well, not as an invoice processing, document processing system, but actually as a GRN processing system.
Okay. We can see many of your customers in the lower half of that page. Have you got public sector organisations using this solution?
We have a number of public sector organisations using this solution, yes. I'm not sure if I'm at liberty to say who, but certainly in the UK we do.
Yeah, okay. So is the solution that we've been looking at, if you could just re-emphasise, is it largely software-based or is it indeed largely SaaS-based?
Or largely what, sorry? I missed that second word.
SaaS, software as a service based.
Oh, SaaS, yes, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, we've found a move from, I mean, ESCA have been providing this software now for nearly 10 years. And we originally started off as purely an on-premise solution, but then we moved towards the software as a solution, and actually we're finding now that the majority of our new implementations are software as a service. And moving more towards a transactionally cost-based system rather than having to invest within the on-premise solution of buying software.
Okay, good. And how does data extraction work where invoices arrive in multiple languages?
We have out of the box the 5 standard European languages. So that would be French, German, Italian, Spanish and English. That is, well, actually 6 if you count UK English as well as US English. If other languages are required, and in fact I think we have recently done Chinese, simple Chinese and Japanese, then the system itself is templated, so we can take a template of all the data key word extractions and simply map those to the new language. So personally, I mean, I've done these systems for the Nordics countries, so most of the sort of Scandinavian countries I have done translations for, and for Dutch and Flemish, which is very similar. So it is possible to template the system, but out of the box, buying the solution, it does come with the 5 standard languages, but it's actually quite simple to template it to other languages as well. And there's two sides to the language equation. One is the data extraction, so the language of the physical document as it comes in, but then the other side is actually the language of the presentation. So I could actually be processing English invoices and extracting English invoice data, but actually viewing it in German, for example, which would help in a shared service center.
Can the solution check for duplicate invoices?
It can, yes, very easily. In fact, I think we saw that during the demonstration, particularly for the purchase order related invoices. And we do that in one of 2 ways. We not only check for invoices which have actually been posted already, but also those invoices which may currently be in the queue waiting to be processed, which I think is a key thing. Because typically, there's 2 sorts of duplications ever occur. One is a genuine duplication where the customer has sent a duplicate invoice to you maybe a week after the original invoice, and you attempt to process it. That would be hopefully one that you would pick up due to the fact you've already processed it. But the other one could be down to scanning the document twice, because these could originate as paper documents. It may be part of your scanning procedure that somebody thinks, oh, maybe I haven't scanned this already, and scans it again. And we check not only, as I say, the posted document, but those that are waiting to be processed. So we will warn you about those.
Okay, and I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. Okay. Can the software process multiple page invoices?
Indeed it can, yes. I think part of the interface we saw there, we've got a wonderful little sort of, it's almost like the old video cassette recorder interface. So we can look at multiple page invoices. The other thing we can also do is that sometimes people send in what looks like a multiple page invoice, but is actually multiple invoices on different pages as a batch. And within that batch, we do have a mechanism whereby if we detect multiple pages in the document, we then can split those multiple pages into separate documents for separate processing. So yes, we can handle multiple pages.
Okay, great. Well, look, Wyn Jones, many thanks indeed for giving us a very thorough overview of your technology and your solution. If you would like to find out more, and I suggest you do look to find out more about the ESCA platform, please make sure that you follow up on the details that are provided there. That's info@esca.co.uk. Many thanks indeed for joining us for this 30-minute demo, and we look forward to welcoming you next time. Goodbye.